The nuclear negotiations with Iran are now approaching a self-imposed deadline of June 30, just a few days from now. The negotiators chose that deadline when they concluded the interim accord 6 months ago and reportedly have been determined to stick to it, to focus their efforts. At the same time, it may be the case that a brief extension deadline, rather than a rush to a conclusion that would bring us to a bad deal, is something that we ought to consider. Senator Corker has told Secretary Kerry exactly that, cautioning him that there is no need so desperate that requires either accepting a bad deal or yielding to unacceptable Iranian demands. I don't necessarily oppose a short-term extension to reach a better conclusion or a better deal, but I have deep concerns about whether that will be the case, even if we extend for a small amount of time. I fear that the Obama administration is not hearing the message that a potential bad deal could be in the making, and it raises great concern. I fear that yielding to one Iranian demand after another in order to secure a deal is exactly what the Obama administration has been doing in its negotiations. I fear that we will return from our Independence Day celebrations to take up a pending Iran nuclear deal that neither permanently foils Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions nor makes us or the world more secure. I fear that this administration, so seemingly desperately eager for a legacy, will choose to define any Iranian deal at all as a great success for diplomacy, no matter how much it concedes to Iranian positions. In May, I and many of my colleagues worked hard to impose a requirement for the administration to present any Iran deal to Congress. Despite strong opposition from the Obama administration, 99 of the 100 senators were convinced that Congress must have the ability to evaluate in detail every aspect of a negotiated settlement and how it is to be imposed, how it is to be monitored and verified. That is our core task once a deal is presented to us. It is an immensely important duty of historic dimensions. I hope and pray that each of us will evaluate the proposed deal on its merits alone and what it would mean for our nation's security, both now and in the future when the terms have expired. Unfortunately, to take up that duty and perform that task, we will have to immerse ourselves in some of the arcane technical details that lie near the heart of such negotiations. I say near the heart rather than at the heart, because the very central issue for me, and hopefully for my colleagues, is the nature of the Iranian regime. Their proven, demonstrated ill will revealed by decades of murderous aggression and lying deceit. That is the proven record of our negotiating partner, and all their claimed commitments will have to be evaluated in that light. However, evaluating the technical details will present its own challenges, and we need to prepare ourselves for that challenge. We need to take stock now of some of those details as they appear at the moment any deal is finalized. To do that, though, we will have to look through a fog of claims and counterclaims to see the outlines of something that is still evolving, even as it remains in the shadows. But with just those partial images, I have some deep concerns. First, it now appears from public comments that our negotiators, and especially Secretary Kerry himself, are no longer insisting that Iran come clean on its past nuclear weapons development activities. This has long been a central demand by our side, as often confirmed by our negotiators themselves. To cave on this demand would be a fatal flaw and should, all by itself, lead to rejection of the deal. Let me state that again. To cave on this demand that Iran come clean on its past nuclear weapons development activities, all by itself, should lead to rejection of the deal if we do not achieve that goal. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, has been pressing for information from Iran about the past nuclear weapons programs for years. Recently, the IAEA Director General explained the importance of the issue this way, and I quote, "What we don't know is whether they have undeclared activities or something else. We don't know what they did in the past. So we know a part of their activities, but we cannot tell we know all of their activities. And that is why we cannot say that all the activities in Iran is in peaceful purposes. The agency is not in a position to provide credible assurance about the absence of undeclared nuclear material and activities in Iran, and therefore to conclude that all nuclear material in Iran is in peaceful activities." End of quote. The Obama administration has long agreed with the IAEA that Iran needs to come clean on its past activities to create a baseline for understanding future activities under any agreement, an absolutely essential standard that has to be met. The U.S. head negotiator, Wendy Sherman, who incidentally negotiated the utterly failed deal with North Korea as well, told a Senate committee in 2013 that, and I quote again, "Iran must agree to address past and present practices," which is the IAEA terminology for possible military dimensions. "We intend to support the IAEA in its efforts to deal with possible military dimensions," she said. Later, she told the SFRC that in the Joint Plan of Action, we have required that Iran come clean. These are the statements of our negotiators. These are the commitments that they made to this Senate and to the American people, that these were the standards that could not be breached, and if it wasn't part of the arrangement, then we would not accept this deal. And so we're quoting here from the record of what policy and what conditions the United States has laid out before the Iranians as, if not achieved, a non-starter of a deal. Secretary Kerry has repeatedly said that the possible military dimensions of the Iranian nuclear program will have to be addressed, and that, quote, "Iranians will have to do it. It will be done," he said. However, I was shocked to read last week that Secretary Kerry told the Department of State press corps that, and I quote, "We are not fixated on Iran specifically accounting for what they did at one point in time or another. We know what they did. We have no doubt. We have absolute knowledge with respect to the certain military activities they were engaged in. What we're concerned about is going forward." End of quote. First of all, this is completely misleading. It is a complete 180-degree turn from what had been committed to earlier. As a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I can state emphatically that we do not have absolute knowledge of anything. That's not how intelligence works. And Secretary Kerry's statement suggests that he may be misusing one of our most valuable tools of statecraft, perhaps a more concerning issue than the statement itself. If we did have absolute knowledge of what the Iranians had done and have done to this date, we would not have spent the past years joining with the IAEA and the responsible international community to demand that Iran come clean. I, for the life of me, cannot understand what Secretary is thinking about when making such a claim. It is in total contradiction of a key facet, maybe the key facet of this deal. And now suddenly we are backing away, saying we know everything, when we have for years been pursuing with the IAEA to get the knowledge of what we do know, and the IAEA basically saying to us, no, we don't know everything. There's a lot we don't know. In any case, I regard this new position as a blatant reversal of a key part of our negotiating objectives and a capitulation to the Iranians, a capitulation that reveals, perhaps, how desperate the administration is to secure a deal, any deal. The next point of concern is the type and pace of sanctions relief we seem to be dangling as an incentive for the Iranians to accept any deal. This issue is very complex technically, legally, and legislatively. One key point is that throughout these negotiations, the administration has consistently argued that any deal would lead only to sanctions relief regarding nuclear issues. But the fact sheet that the White House put out following the interim deal framework stated, quote, and I quote, U.S. sanctions on Iran for terrorism, human rights abuses, and ballistic missiles will remain in place under the deal. Let me say that again. The administration put out this fact sheet following the interim deal and stating U.S. sanctions on Iran for terrorism, human rights, abuses, and ballistic missiles will remain in place under the deal. Now, it seems this limitation was not good enough for the Iranians, and we have caved again. Yesterday, the so-called supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, included this matter in his expanding list of red lines. He said, and I quote, all economic, financial, and banking sanctions implemented either by the United Nations Security Council, the United States Congress, or the administration must be lifted immediately when the deal is signed. According to media reports, which have not been refuted by the administration since they began appearing last month, the Supreme Leader has won again. The emerging deal may roll back sanctions that had been imposed for these other non-nuclear reasons. According to these reports, based on leaks from the negotiating teams, 23 out of the 24 currently sanctioned Iranian banks will be delisted as sanctions targets, including the Central Bank of Iran. This is the Revolutionary Guard Corps-dominated institution that was sanctioned because of its role in money laundering, financing terrorism, ballistic missile research, and campaigns aimed at bolstering the Assad regime in Syria. Removing sanctions applied to these banks will give Iran hundreds of billions of dollars that could be used for their terrorism activities and regional proxy wars. These reports, if true, constitute yet another reversal of clearly stated policy and yet another capitulation to the Iranians. Number 3, it appears that the negotiators may be aiming at an arrangement to set aside the dispute about open free access to Iranian facilities. We have long maintained that any agreement would have to give the IAEA such access, stated over and over to us through our briefings, by the Secretary, by others negotiating this. What this means is open, free access, anytime, anywhere. It appears that this is not now the case. We have long maintained that the IAEA have access anytime, any place, as our spokesmen have often emphasized. President Obama himself reassured the region's nervous Arab leaders on this very point in an effort to gain their acceptance of the deal. In the meantime, once again, the Ayatollah Khomeini, supreme leader, has stated emphatically that no such access would be granted, and other Iranian authorities repeated this red line that the Iranians have drawn on the deal and that we're capitulating to, one after another. Their parliament even recently passed a law to this effect. It looked like an unbridgeable gap. Khomeini repeated this firm position again just yesterday. Now, some argue that Khomeini's declarations are part of a negotiating strategy. Well, if so, it seems to have worked. Any place access for truly intrusive inspections has been taken out. We've dropped anytime, any place. The buzzword, that phrase now that's being given to us is managed access. I first heard that, I scratched, what in the world does that mean, manage access? With this concept, it appears there would now be a mechanism that would evaluate requests for access to determine if there's a genuine need. Instead of any time, any place, anywhere, for any reason, in order to verify that the Iranians are not cheating, that has turned into now a request for a search or for access to at their time and their decision as to what the place would be or what the place would not be. This makes a mockery of the state of the original required demand for any access at any time, any place. Access where needed, when needed, seems to be the new mantra. Where needed, when needed, giving them plenty of time to make a decision as to yay or nay, or to remove from those sites damning evidence of their pursuit of nuclear capability. Because this issue of access is crucial to the issue of credibility, verification, and compliance, it arguably is the most important requirement of all for an acceptable deal. Those advocating for the emerging deal are actually boasting that this artful dodge is a negotiating victory. Is there anything more we need to say about the weak and compromising negotiating strategy of those who are currently at the table representing the United States? Mr. President, I've just named and spelled out 3 major concerns regarding these negotiations. But there are many other aspects of the apparently emergent deal that separately and together show a pattern, a very disturbing pattern of constant retreat and capitulation by this administration in the negotiations with the Iranians. I won't go into details of each of these, but let me just run off of several other issues of major concern. 1, the clearly inadequate time frame for any agreement. The sunset clause is no longer a part of the negotiations. 2, outrageously generous details of sanctions relief, both scale and timing. The almost laughable, specious claims of sanctions snapback provisions, whatever that means, once the sanction regimes have been dismantled. The types and numbers of enrichment equipment that can be retained by the Iranians. The types of enrichment activities that will be permitted in the thousands of modern centrifuges in the most fortified bunkered facilities. Fatal limitations on our ability to monitor and verify compliance, and the joint plan of action provisions that Iran has already blatantly violated without any White House comment. My colleagues, once a deal is announced, it will be critical that we exercise the wisdom and courage to evaluate it honestly. My doubts about our ability to do so are aggravated by the public relations campaign we can foresee. Indeed, we have seen it before, when the Clinton administration told us the nuclear deal with North Korea was, quote, good for America. I was a member of the Senate at that time. I raised a number of issues and concerns about whether or not this deal with North Korea was good for America, and I did not vote to support that effort. Nevertheless, the treaty was agreed to. The framework agreement with North Korea, as President Clinton said in 1994, quote, is a good deal for the United States. North Korea will freeze and dismantle its nuclear programs. North Korea will freeze and dismantle its nuclear programs. South Korea and our other allies will be better protected. The entire world will be safer as we slow the spread of nuclear weapons. The United States and international inspectors will carefully monitor North Korea to make sure it keeps its commitments. Only as it does so will North Korea fully join the community of nations. That's what was promised in 1994. That's what was stated to senators on this floor in 1994. That we can count on the fact that we're going to know if the North Koreans cheat, and we're not going to allow them to do that. How significantly this resonates now, all these years later, as we are assured by the administration and by Secretary Kerry that don't worry, everything's covered, the inspections will take place, they won't be able to cheat, we'll know it if they do, the sanctions will come back on, we'll snap back those sanctions relief, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some members took a bite of that apple and regret that. I didn't, and I'm sure not going to take another bite of that apple, or no one else should, view this current negotiation with Iran without putting it in the context of what was done before. We've been here before. We need to learn the lessons from that. We now know that North Korea possesses dozens of nuclear weapons, the ballistic missile capacity to deliver those weapons. We now know they cheated blatantly and we didn't know it. The so-called guarantee of verification was not accomplished and not achieved. So before making a final decision on the Iran so-called deal, we need to learn the lessons from the Clinton administration's agreement with North Korea. The similarities between the secret negotiations then and the secret ones now are remarkable. In 1994, a key sticking point was complete access to nuclear sites, and then, too, we caved in order to get the deal. In 1994, the White House and major media outlets trumpeted a deal that would make the world safer, a victory for diplomacy over force and hostility. Those who didn't see this as something that was going to be enforced were called warmongers. And here's the choice, war or peace. Some choice. North Korea promised to forgo their nuclear weapons ambitions, and although I could not vote to support President Clinton's request, enough of the Senate did to approve the agreement with North Korea. And now we know that they have between 20 and 40 nuclear weapons, possibly miniaturized ICBMs, continental ballistic missiles to put them on, and recently tested submarine-launched missiles. Another lesson is the time gap between the heralded diplomatic breakthrough and the revelation that we had been taken to the cleaners. It took years to learn what we had really done in North Korea and not done in North Korea. The failure of a bad deal with Iran will not be evident to most of us for years, perhaps even 10 or 11 or 12 years, even when President Obama concedes that Iran's nuclear breakout time will be zero. In fact, such a delay, in the unlikely event Iran actually complies with the deal, is a stated objective of the P5+1 negotiators to impose a delay of a decade or so on Iran's nuclear weapons program. And that's what they will define as success. But we must remember this. Today's brutal, unhinged, nuclear-armed North Korea is actually a product of misguided and naive American diplomacy, sold to the Senate as something other than what it was. We now know that the agreement with North Korea was not a diplomatic victory, but a diplomatic and policy failure, an absolute failure. My deep concern is that this time many will once again see the emerging deal as a great victory for diplomacy, no matter what it contains. The utterly false claim that it presents a choice between peaceful resolution of a dispute and war as a consequence of not arranging and agreeing to a deal will be a central part of the discourse and salesmanship that will confront us as senators. Those opposed will potentially be labeled as warmongers. It's good of us to remember something that was said by Winston Churchill leading up to World War II. Peace at any price does not lead to peace. It only lengthens the path to war with far greater consequences in terms of cost and blood. So for us, we're going to have to stand up to those that posit the false choice between peace and between war. We have a more difficult obligation of historic consequence looking to the following decade. Such a duty must not be guided by party. It must not be guided by politics. It must not be guided by deference, either to the White House, our own leadership, or even our constituents. We must look at each and every detail of any agreement presented to us to reach a judgment on whether or not this so-called deal with Iran will prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons capability. Then, and only then, we must decide on that basis whether to approve or reject the deal that will be presented to us by the President and his Secretary of State. To do anything less than fulfilling this obligation and this duty that each one of us has, it will be a failure for us as a duty of being a United States Senator, with historic consequences if we get it wrong. My hope and prayer and wish and desire and admonition is that each one of us see this as something with historic consequences that will affect not only the future of our nation and our people, but will affect the future of the world. And so therefore, we must give full attention and every ounce of our best wisdom and judgment in determining, not for political or party or any other reason other than finding out and determining whether this deal is acceptable or not acceptable, and make our yes be yes and our no be no, well-reasoned and well-judged and well-decided. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor.